All right, welcome to the cold weather shelter training brought to you by Snohomish County, Volunteers of America, LINC Northwest, and Everett Gospel Mission. My name is Tyler Verda. I'm a Human Services Program Planner for Snohomish County, and I have the pleasure of working with our dedicated and talented cold weather shelter providers across the county. I want to thank you all for joining us this evening and making some time volunteering at a cold weather shelter. Helping folks coming out of the cold is an extremely fulfilling experience, and volunteers are critical to our cold weather shelters across the county. So thank you all very much for joining us. If we could go to the first slide for introductions. Nathan, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. I appreciate it. Hello, everyone. My name is Nathan Ray. I'm the cold weather shelter coordinator in Marysville for our cold weather shelter that's hosted at Bethlehem Lutheran Church this year as well as last year. In previous years, it's been in different locations. I have about 20 years in disaster response, providing primarily for psychological, emotional, spiritual support, as well as some of the practical. And as this is my third year now, coordinating the cold weather shelter in Marysville, and so getting lots of hands-on with the practical. That's me.
Thanks, Nathan. Lindsay?
Yeah, hello, everyone. My name is Lindsay Gagnon. I'm the Executive Director for Volunteers of America's Community Resource Centers in Arlington, Lake Stevens, and out in East County, Sky Valley. And we oversee the operations of the Monroe and Snohomish cold weather shelters. And this will be our fourth year of overseeing that. So thank you all for joining in tonight.
And then working the slides in the background, we have Ryan Brown, Executive Director for LINC Northwest.
Glad to be with y'all. I'll just be over here trying to make the slides work.
All right, Ryan, if you could go to the next slide, please. So the agenda, we will go over what a cold weather shelter is, some of the volunteer opportunities at cold weather shelters, shelter basics and some of the key guidance. We'll talk about shelter operations, so what it looks like on any given night at a cold weather shelter or in the morning when the cold weather shelter is closing up. We'll talk about some safety tips, and then we'll have time for questions. And really the intent with this online training is to give folks a sense of what it looks like volunteering in a cold weather shelter, and to cover some of the key guidance and basics for volunteering at a cold weather shelter. We're not going to be able to cover everything in the training today, but it should give folks a really good sense of what it looks like volunteering at a cold weather shelter. And then afterwards, we'll connect you with the cold weather shelter that you showed interest in volunteering at, and they'll share the volunteer handbook and onboard you into their volunteer management system. And then when you work your first shifts at the shelter, there'll also be some training on site at the shelter as well. Next slide. Cold weather shelter locations. So we have cold weather shelters across the county. In Everett, the cold weather shelter is operated by the Everett Gospel Mission. In Marysville, it's operated by LINC Northwest. And Volunteers of America operates cold weather shelters in Monroe, Snohomish, and South County. Each one of these cold weather shelters has an incredible background story and history. There's a lot of effort and a lot of partnerships that goes into every one of the cold weather shelters. One that I like to talk about is the South County Cold Weather Shelter. That started over a decade ago, I think 15 years, when some folks that were experiencing homelessness came into a community meal. They showed frostbite and just exposure to the elements. And that volunteer group took it on themselves to start the South County Cold Weather Shelter. And it was just community members coming together to provide a critical life-saving service. That story is not unique to South County. Every one of our cold weather shelters has an awesome story of community members and volunteers just rising to the occasion and making sure folks have a safe place to come in out of the cold. Next slide, please. The objective of cold weather shelter. So the primary objective is to provide a safe and welcoming overnight shelter to individuals who would otherwise be unsheltered and at risk of dangerous exposure. So really this is, in a lot of situations, a life-saving intervention. It's obviously the humane thing to do. The importance of cold weather shelters, I can't describe enough. The cold weather shelters activate when the forecasted temperature is 34 degrees or below. The forecast is monitored daily, and the decision to activate a cold weather shelter is made 24 hours in advance. The temperature that we're monitoring there is the temperature in the local jurisdiction. So we monitor the temperature in all the cities that have cold weather shelters. So for example, when the temperature reaches 34 degrees or below in Everett, the Everett cold weather shelter will activate, and that decision is made 24 hours in advance. All of the shelter openings are listed on the Snohomish County Public Safety Hub. So you can go to that Public Safety Hub and on any given night see which cold weather shelters in the county are open and which are closed. Shelters provide overnight accommodations. So we'll talk about this a little bit later, but generally cold weather shelters open between 7 and 8 o'clock at night. Folks have a set amount of time to come into the shelter and go through the intake process. And then the following day, folks do have to leave the shelter and go to a warming center or library or other place. All of the locations of our cold weather shelters are hosted by churches. So many of those facilities have to use the space for other purposes during the day. And cold weather shelters operate between November and March. That's our cold weather season. I will say we got a kind of an early start to the season, and thank you to our cold weather shelters that were able to put staff and resources in place and open up towards the end of October. Next slide. Why is cold weather shelter needed? So last year, cold weather shelters were open an average of 63 nights across the county. The peak census occurred on December 22nd, when 181 individuals received cold weather shelter across the county. So to me, that's really an astounding number. That's a huge impact to make sure that 181 individuals are able to come in out of the cold. Lots of volunteer efforts, lots of effort from our cold weather shelter providers to make that happen. And I'm incredibly grateful. The 2023 point in time count found 1,285 individuals experiencing homelessness in Snohomish County, and of those, 691 people were living without shelter. So put simply, there's just not enough places to house people, especially during extreme weather. Next slide, please. So how are our communities responding to homelessness in general? Advocating for and investing in affordable housing and shelter space. The new Housing and Behavioral Health Capital Fund that is just coming to our community will fund housing and behavioral health facilities, and it's estimated to provide 700 new units over the next 5 years. So very exciting stuff there. Permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, eviction prevention, landlord engagement, embedded social workers, housing navigators are just a few of the homeless housing services that are provided in Snohomish County. There are one-stop service hubs such as family support centers and Carnegie resource centers. Volunteers of America runs 211 in Snohomish County, where folks can call and talk to a community resource navigator and get connected to different services. And of course, also we provide cold weather shelter here in Snohomish County. Next slide, please. And for our shelter guests, I'll turn this over to Lindsay.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. So I'm excited to see those that have never experienced volunteering at a shelter or something similar to really visit and learn more about our guests, because we really serve a wide variety of those experiencing homelessness. I think stereotypically folks might think of, single adults with maybe a lot of substance use that use shelters, especially cold weather shelters. And I can say that at Monroe and Snohomish, and I can't speak for Marysville, but I'm sure Nathan could agree that there's a lot of folks that work, that have steady income, that really are trying to get by, but just simply can't make ends meet in the world today. And so really guests have a variety of different life experiences, different lengths of homelessness, from chronic to maybe just recently or sudden, really different physical conditions, behavioral health challenges. You will definitely see some behavioral health challenges, but staff are trained to help deal with those and help make sure that it's a safe environment for all that are using and volunteering at the shelter. Including a lot of trauma. You are going to see folks that are experiencing trauma, but that doesn't define them. And so that kind of leads into the next point of, you don't know the challenges that folks are facing that day. And so folks might come in a little bit angry, but it's not our place to say, hey, cheer up. It's our place to serve them a warm meal, make sure that they're comfortable and they have a warm place and a safe place to stay for the night. So let's see, off track. We're also, let's see, another thing about our shelter guests is it's great to listen to them. But really something that we like to advise all volunteers is that we don't like to get into too much of their personal stories, because that's just not our place in this one night of service. If they share something with you, that's great. You can listen to them, but really try to avoid as getting too personal, including physical touch. We like to just really avoid that physical touch, because again, you don't know what trauma or what folks have faced during that day that might trigger something. And really overall, I like to really say that guests that we serve are very appreciative of what we're doing. And so they really just appreciate having a place to come on the coldest nights of the year, because there's such a lack of these places that are available in the county. And so above all, they're going to be really grateful. And so we like to just kind of set the tone that you will see a lot of different shelter guests, but there's so much good in what we're doing, and there's so much gratefulness that they have for us. So Nathan, do you want to add anything about shelter guests as well?
Yeah, that great summary there, Lindsay. Thank you. I'll tag in there that sometimes our shelter guests have ended up, at least in Marysville, have ended up being our staff and people who aren't homeless, but simply need a place for the night. For anyone who was living in the area a year ago, right about this time, we had a pretty major windstorm that came through and knocked out power for large pieces of the county. And we actually had volunteers and staff members who stayed at the shelter for 2-3. There may be been one person who was there for longer, but at least for 2 or 3 nights. As well, and I'm guessing this is the same across the board. Just as in a restaurant, we get our regulars and we have our one-time guests. And so we get to know some of the guests better than others. And Lindsay, you had talked about having, the working homeless, and we definitely have had that. And one of the things we've been able to do is provide them that safe, warm place where they can get rest to be able to work. And, they get up at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning and, head off to their jobs. Some of them have vehicles, some of them don't. But the other piece that we found in particular in Marysville is that we have quite a few regulars who are receiving some form of government aid, such as SSI. And it's simply not enough to get them into housing for whatever reason. And so, that can definitely be another factor there. You're on target as far as sharing the personal stories. Most people who are going to volunteer, most of the folks who are watching this right now, you probably really want to make that connection with people, and you probably have a lot of natural and maybe, educated skills as well. And one of the things that we really need to remind ourselves as we're serving in the shelter is that we are not there as case managers. We are not there as social workers. We are there to provide that place, to provide that listening ear, to make sure that our guests feel heard, and then to try to refer and connect. Lindsay, you run the community resource centers, and those are places that, we have on speed dial. And, we make sure that guests know that they're available and that they can go there in order to connect for those other things. I kind of liken the cold weather shelter experience as being on a medic crew, where you're going out to the scene and you're trying to take care of what you can right there, but you're not trying to perform surgery. You're trying to refer people on in order to get that continuing care and connect them with the resources that will hopefully enable them to move into a position where they don't need to come to the shelter anymore. So thanks for letting me jump in too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing your experience. It's really appreciated.
Yeah, thank you. Next slide. So the different volunteer opportunities, there are many, and Nathan and Lindsay do a wonderful job of connecting folks with the volunteer opportunity that fits their comfort level and their schedules. Generally, some of the opportunities, there's an opening shift, and we'll talk more about the specifics of that, but that's setting up the shelter, doing the intake process, directing folks to a bed. Mid shift, generally that's one of the quieter shifts, and that's monitoring, keeping an eye on things, and making sure everybody's safe. If there are any issues, then addressing the issues if they come up. And then the early morning shift, that's helping folks wake up, serving a hot beverage, directing folks to libraries or warming centers, and then cleaning up the shelter and turning it over to whatever other uses there are. And then there's also some opportunities to help prepare and serve meals. Nathan, do you want to talk a little bit more about the different types of volunteer opportunities?
Yeah, could we go back one slide real quickly? Thank you. So yeah, these are definitely the general ones. I know that in Marysville, we've broken it down even further, and we have like 6 or 7 shifts. One thing that I don't see on here is the laundry, which is also an important shift. It's generally during the day, not during shelter hours, but making sure that bedding, those blankets and sheets and pillowcases that are used each night are getting clean and sanitized for the next night's use. But I wanted to highlight real quickly on the mid shift. The mid shift can be a challenging one for people because quite often I've heard from volunteers that they don't feel like they're doing anything. Majority of guests are going to be asleep, and there's not a whole lot of the interaction that you sometimes have with that opening shift or with the closing shift, as you're getting folks up and making sure that they get a start on their day. But the mid shift is actually one of the most important shifts, in my opinion, because the mid shift is where we're truly providing that safety for our unsheltered guests. When you put yourself in someone who's experiencing homelessness shoes, so to speak, the daytime is safe and nighttime can be scary because it's dark. There aren't as many people around. And so that's a time of danger and wariness. And it can make it really difficult to even rest, much less sleep, because you feel like you have to be on your guard and you have to be really watching out. And so what we do with the cold weather shelter is we actually, on those cold nights, provide that safety of being able to tell our guests, I have your back. I see you, I hear you, and I'm going to make sure that nothing happens to you and nothing's going to happen to your belongings. And that's something that a lot of our guests don't get outside of the shelter. So although it doesn't have that interaction a whole lot, it is really important. As well, that mid shift, which, the times are going to vary a little bit, but, it's usually late at night, say 11 o'clock or so until maybe 3 or so in the morning. That's the time where sometimes people have not heard about the shelter or they don't have a way to get there. And so they're quite often contacting law enforcement or medical services and getting an escort to the shelter in order to be able to come in out of the cold. So having our folks there provides that opportunity for people to be able to come in, even if they're not able to make it because of transportation or simple lack of knowledge. So thanks, Tyler.
There is a quick question that was asked about
that's a great
shifts.
description, Nathan. Thank you. Lindsay, did you want to add anything about these volunteer opportunities, or should we move on to the next slide?
No, Nathan really highlighted it all. I think do we have a little bit of time later, or
we do.
I can expand on maybe the opening and closing a little bit more.
Okay, perfect. Next slide. All right, and then Nathan, do you want to talk some about the shelter basics and key guidance here?
Certainly. I do want to. I saw a question pop up. Shift times are going to be different at each shelter because the different shelters sometimes have different opening times and different times when they can when they need to close. And so that's going to be a question specifically for the shelter where you're looking to volunteer. So I hope that helps.
And I think that would also be in the volunteer handbook too for the different cold weather shelters. So once we connect you with the cold weather shelter that you plan on volunteering at, then you'll get a little bit more information on the specific shifts at that shelter.
Yeah. Okay, so jumping in here, safety. That has to be first consideration in everything. And we're not talking safety just for one, we're talking safety for all. When I talk about safety, and when we go through and we look at the handbook and we look at our policies, our procedures, and how we want to do things, we want to make sure that our guests are going to be safe. We want to make sure that our staff are going to be safe. We want to make sure that our building is going to be safe. We want to make sure that the neighborhood where we are housed is going to be safe. And then overall, we want to make sure that the community is going to be safe. And so we need to look at everything through that lens as far as when we make decisions around how are we going to specifically do things at our shelter. For each shelter, that's going to be a little bit different because we have, different sets of guests, different volunteers, different churches, neighborhoods, and communities that have their own unique personalities. But with all of that, please understand that when you receive the handbook, when you get that on-the-job training, and when we are trying to lay out some guidelines, and I hope that I speak for everyone here. I always look for feedback before making, policies and procedure changes. But those policies and procedures are going to be with a focus of maintaining safety for all of those individuals and groups. And that's why we have that next bullet point about being consistent. It can be a really struggle at times because we have different supervisors, we have different crews, we have different volunteers, and sometimes someone will tug your heartstrings and you really want to, well, I'll just bend, this rule. I know that the shelter guideline is to, not help, with specific needs individually, but rather to try and connect with resources and connect our guests to the, resource center or to the Salvation Army or, whoever else may be in that community. But I'll just take care of this for this person. But the homeless in each community tend to have their own community as well. And there's discussion and there's talk. And people know whether or not there is consistency that this is the way it is at the shelter. And so therefore we need to work with that in order for the shelter to continue operating, or whether, well, we can push things here and this rule doesn't really apply if so-and-so is working. And so we want to watch that because we could actually compromise someone's safety by changing things from shift to shift, from volunteer to volunteer, from person to person. The buddy system is a piece of that safety. We want to make sure that we are keeping in contact so that if something should happen, there is someone else who's able to come and be of assistance. Even when I'm having a private conversation with someone, I want to make sure that I have other people who are working that night who can see, so that if something should happen, they're able to help. This also helps when it comes to medical emergencies, because those do happen. And so I'll give an example from Marysville. We had a situation last year where we had someone who had been ill. They had gone to the hospital. They had come back the next night saying that they were okay. And unfortunately, they had a reoccurrence of fainting and falling. And because we were watching, and we were aware of what happened, one of our volunteers was able to call 911. And then while they were dealing with 911 and having that contact and bringing the medics in when they arrived, and letting them know what we knew about that guest and their condition, the other volunteers were able to keep an eye there while still being able to maintain the safety and be there for the other guests in the shelter. And so that's why we look for that buddy system and always maintaining that connection, at least visual. And so the staying alert and aware, that definitely falls in, again, under all of the safety. Everything goes through that lens, and then we go on to that next part. Because if we can't maintain the safety for, again, our guests, our volunteers, our building, our neighborhood, and our community, then we're not going to be able to maintain the shelter. So everything must go through that. Lindsay, I'll let you jump in now.
All right. So moving on to stressing maintaining guest privacy. And I would include maintaining your own privacy to this part of the slide. We ask that you do not take videos or pictures of shelter guests, or really of the shelter. And that's really to protect not only guests, but yourself as well, including don't share social media channels, really whatsoever. And so we have really a hard boundary for privacy, just like that. That goes along with maintaining appropriate boundaries. So like I was talking about earlier, don't share your personal stories, not your contact information. This is a volunteer opportunity, so we really like to stress that you're here to volunteer and to really serve the guests, and to form that connection is not the place or time for volunteering at the cold weather shelter. And really, when you're in doubt, ask staff. And so, just like Nathan was saying earlier, guests can really pull at your heartstrings. Absolutely, they are going through a very, very hard time, and who wouldn't be pulled by some of these folks' stories? But there are loads of community resources and navigators that are experts on helping navigate housing and navigate getting resources and helping pulling these folks into stability. And so I like to remind volunteers that there's folks working on this every single day that are really trying to build those bridges and wraparound services for these individuals, because we're not going to solve homelessness in one night. Solving homelessness for a lot of folks takes years, a long time. And so like to kind of take that stress off of folks as well. So when in doubt, just ask any of the staff that are there. Next one.
Okay, so jumping in then on the maintaining privacy, right? We ask that you don't share your social media information with guests, right? Don't accept that friend request from your shelter guest, and don't take pictures of our guests either, and share them back out. We need to maintain that privacy, because that is part of the safety that guests feel. We've had folks who are, working on getting out of DV situations. We've had people, who for various reasons don't want it publicized that they are at the shelter, whether it's because it's a shelter or just because they want to maintain their privacy. Phones. It's really difficult sometimes to say no. If you have a guest who's saying, hey, I just need to be able to contact so-and-so, but I lost my phone and blah, blah, blah. Could I just use yours? Unfortunately, we need to maintain, again, the safety piece. As you can tell, that's kind of a soapbox for me. But with phones, if you loan your phone out, now someone at the other end has your number, and they can look at you as being a conduit to be able to contact that particular guest. And they may try and backtrack and find things out about you. And so really, in order to protect yourself, we need to make sure that you're not loaning your phone. Some shelters may have a phone that they can allow people to use. You'll need to check with, supervisor or coordinator at the shelter that you're planning on volunteering with. Sometimes there's an office phone that a church has made available, that type of thing. But in general, we simply have to let our guests know that, no, I'm sorry, we're not able to let you use a phone right now. However, tomorrow you could connect with the Community Resource Center or wherever it is that they're going, DSHS or something like that, and they may have a phone for you to be able to use. Giving money, gifts, providing rides, those all fall again under that piece of, we need to make sure that we're consistently following the rules, that we are providing for all as we would provide for one. The shelter is not a place where we're going to be providing gas money, where we're going to be providing food money, where we're going to be meeting those individual needs. Instead, what we're looking at is, just as in kindergarten, we needed to be able to bring in for the entire class. And that needs to be done at that shelter level appropriately. I'm not aware of any shelters that maintain like a clothes closet, for example. And Lindsay, if I'm mistaken on that, please let me know. But as far as I know, we connect folks over in order to get clothes and some of those types of items that, like, for example, the resource centers provide. Sometimes we have things such as, gloves, hats, dry socks. Those are always good things that are appropriate at the cold weather shelter. For the other pieces, we want to connect our guests with that ongoing ability to provide for some of their needs. And then as far as bringing valuables to the shelter, most people do carry their phone, and on occasion, someone will bring a laptop if they're going to be working like that mid shift or that closing early morning shift. And so that they can get a little bit done, during the quiet time. But in general, we try to discourage that because we just don't want to provide opportunity for anything to go wrong or to go missing.
Yeah, and Nathan, I can chime in, kind of going back to your point about giving items to guests, and just to talk about our East County cold weather shelters, to backpedal just a little bit. We are blessed by a lot of winter wear drives that the community does with different organizations, different individuals that really, really step up and realize that's really cold, or that want to do a coat drive or want to do a drive for socks. And so we'll always try to make sure that we have winter wear available. And so we do have the fortunate ability to be able to provide that to guests, especially socks. We really collect that year round. And especially in Monroe, at our new Monroe site, we are co-located with a church that has a clothing bank. And so that's just some really unique feature. But Marysville, again, LINC Northwest does a great job of being a family resource center that connect those individuals. But there's just little site-specific things that we can do for our guests. So don't think that guests are not being supported. Not at all. But we just really don't want to, like Nathan said, provide for one when we really should be providing for all. I think that was a great statement. So anyway, moving on to more things not to do, is really don't share political views. This isn't the place to do that. Really, we can get into some heated arguments that, just around the Thanksgiving or Christmas table, you just don't want to get into, along with religious views. So we really ask that you just keep those at the door and just don't bring them in, as well, along with engaging in social work. Again, we touched on that a little bit earlier, but really that's not your role as a volunteer, to be sitting down and seeing what help each of these guests need. Speaking to our Monroe and Snohomish cold weather shelters, we have really the privilege of being the Sky Valley Community Resource Center, where we have the East County Navigator. And so the East County Navigator will be trying to be integrated as much as possible, to try to connect with these guests that they wouldn't already be connected to through the coordinated entry 2-on-1 system, to get a housing navigator. So that's just one example of what we're trying to really thoughtfully connect these guests to, because again, folks are working on this every single day. And so we really just ask that you really leave it to the experts that will be bringing in. Yeah.
Great. And if we could go to the next slide, and I think Lindsay's going to talk about a typical shelter night.
All right. Yeah, a typical shelter night. So a typical night would start first by setup. And so, for instance, at our Monroe and Snohomish cold weather shelters, setup is between 7 and 8 p.m. because we open our doors at 8 p.m. for guests to come in. And so really volunteers would arrive at 7, staff would get there before to open up and just to make sure things were set for volunteers to just pick up and go. We'll set up the cots, the bedding. We have air purifiers supplied by the county, so thank you for those. Those are great to keep the air just clean and as healthy as possible for everyone. Our intake table, Tyler will talk about our guest agreements, but every guest will sign a guest agreement that we'll keep on file, and then every other night they'll just sign in. So a simple sign-in table where they'll get their blanket, they'll get their sheet, and they'll find their cot. And then it's setting up dinner. So it could be serving dinner, getting bowls and silverware out, and making sure guests have a comfortable place to eat. To getting folks ready for lights out. So at the Monroe and Snohomish cold weather shelters, our doors close at 10. And like Nathan said before, we really stick to that for good reasons to establish those boundaries. So doors close at 10. That means we just really have to encourage guests around 9:45 to be packing things in. We do allow smoking, but last smoke break is at 9:45 to make sure that we get folks in and settled. So we stick to that 10 o'clock lights out window of time. Is there another slide?
I think Nathan has some stuff to add to this too.
Yeah, go for it, Nathan.
Yeah. So Lindsay, things are pretty similar in Marysville, and as we've been noting, there are those little differences. So, for example, in Marysville, we open our doors at 9. We open our doors at 7. And guests can check in until 9:30. Just as you were mentioning, we provide 2 escorted smoke breaks for those with a nicotine habit, because we don't want people coming in and out and free roaming, and so we make sure that's taken care of there. As well, the last couple of years, at least here, we've created an actual separate food ministry, so that we have, because there are some people who don't either feel comfortable or unable to serve, in the shelter setting and interacting with the guests, or maybe just spending the time at the registration table, that type of thing. And for some, they simply feel called to serve by providing food. And I think we all have at least one person in our family who probably is that way, that they show their love by providing food. And so we've kind of separated that out a little bit to give that opportunity. Other than that, you nailed it. So thank you.
Okay, next slide, and we'll talk about the guest agreement. So the guest agreement, all guests must sign and agree to the guest agreement when they first come into the shelter. The guest agreement, I'll have to say, we have our friends out at the East County cold weather shelters to thank for originating this. A lot of tweaking has went into the agreement over the years, a lot of thought and time. And the guest agreement now we use as a template for all of our cold weather shelters. So Nathan in Marysville has taken that guest agreement and made some moderations, but it's pretty similar. In Everett, we use a similar guest agreement. So it's really helpful to have kind of those same policies and procedures at cold weather shelters across the county, and want to thank East County for their work in putting that together in the first place. The guest agreement outlines the shelter rules, what is expected of the guests, and in turn, what the guests can expect at the shelter. It'll tell them about the hours of operation. So Nathan and Lindsay were talking about the intake times. It'll tell them about the check-in times, smoke breaks, designated smoking areas, when lights are out, and etc. One thing to stress is all the rules and everything in the guest agreement is based on maintaining safety and security and ensuring that we can continue to provide these critical services. It is so important that we can provide cold weather shelter on nights with dangerously cold weather from November through March. And we can only do that if we can ensure safety and security at these shelters. And a big part of that is making sure that we're clear and consistent about the rules and expectations. So a couple of those rules and expectations, absolutely no alcohol, marijuana, or illegal drugs on the premises, no smoking or vaping inside the shelters. Weapons must be checked. Firearms are prohibited. So sometimes you'll have folks that come in with, usually it's a pocket knife. They'll turn over the pocket knife, we'll write their name on it, lock it up, and then when they leave the shelter, they can get the pocket knife back. Absolutely no threatening behavior, verbal or physical abuse. And then some of the shelters allow pets. The pets need to be crated. And just like a person, the pets need to behave in a way that doesn't put other people's safety or security at risk. And I think we can move on to the next slide. Nathan or Lindsay, do you have anything to add to the guest agreement?
It's just as with the handbook, it's what I call a living document, right? It's a snapshot of these are our best policies and procedures until we know better. And so I know that ours continues to evolve, both the handbook and that guest agreement. And that's actually something I have to do and work on over the next week or so here.
That's a good point, Nathan, because yes, it might have originated in East County, but I really like to remind folks that has been adapted over the years as of course, as we know better, as we do better, to serve this population. So it's really is a living document, but it's really based off of what we deem to be best practices. And one other thing I that came to my mind I wanted to add is that it's signed the first night that a guest comes to the shelter. And really, we take the time on their first night to walk through it with them. A lot of guests, we can't assume that they know how to read. And so we really like to take the time to make sure, and if they do, then we take the time to make sure they really fully understand the rules, because them signing that agreement says that they will abide by the rules. And if they break the rules, there is some consequences that just have to be taken into play, because those are boundaries, right? And we have to maintain safety. So that's another reason why the agreement is so important.
Great.
Nathan, do you want to talk about the morning?
Yeah, and we'll turn it over to Nathan to talk about a typical shelter morning.
Okay, thank you. So that typical shelter morning, and again, that time is going to vary depending on which particular shelter you're working at. But we will bring the lights up slowly. As we talked about earlier, quite often we have, our working unhoused who, some of them have already gotten up and some of them have already checked out for the morning by the time that we're trying to get everyone up. But it's not a, flip on all the lights and bang a stick inside a garbage can to get people up and moving. We're trying to do it the way that we would want it done for us, which is we're going to bring the lights up. We're going to slowly bring folks up, remind them of what their duties are, because yes, our guests have duties as well. Or at least, in my shelter, I guess I'm kind of assuming there, but we generally ask guests to, strip their own beds. And we've got a procedure set up for laundry. I don't know if that's the case in all of our other shelters, whether it's, East County or Everett or anything there. But we're looking then at, we need to get things ready so that they can be clean, they can be sanitized. In some shelters, the bedding that has been used, the cots, the pillows, etc., need to be put up for the day because that room needs to be used by the church or other community groups. The coffee and light breakfast is not something that we do at Marysville. We have a partnership with Salvation Army, which is only a few blocks away from us. And on nights when the Marysville shelter is open, the next morning, they set up what they call a warming station where they have those hot beverages and light breakfast items. I love that it's available though, where we don't have those partnerships to be able to direct guests to. As far as that cleanup goes, as I mentioned, we try to engage because we're trying to give that hand up, not just a hand out. And so a lot of our guests request ways that they can help. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And so simply by being helpful to our staff and, taking off their own sheets, putting the blankets in one bag, putting sheets in another bag, that type of thing, they're helping. We make sure that floors and bathrooms are cleaned. So whether it's a carpeted area, whether it's a tiled area, or vinyl, whatever it may be, we make sure that we have appropriate cleaning supplies on hand. And so, areas are vacuumed if needed. A carpet cleaner can be brought into use and the rugs can be shampooed. We take particular care around the high use areas, such as the bathrooms, and make sure that everything is cleaned and sanitized. We go through thousands and thousands of the disinfectant wipes, whatever brand that may be, Lysol, Clorox, other brands, but making sure that handles and toilet seats and faucets and everything like that are all wiped down so that we're providing that safety experience for our guests and our staff and the people who are going to use the building after us. And then we try to do a sweep around afterward in order to check for garbage, because unfortunately garbage does get left. Sometimes people have stashed something that they didn't want to bring into the shelter and they forget about it. Sometimes, things fall, and I mean, we know that litter is a part of being alive, but we try to make sure that it's cleaned up and not attracting more. So that's your typical shelter morning there. I will add that, sometimes it can be difficult. People don't necessarily want to get up. They're not excited about the idea of leaving the warm, dry place and venturing out into the elements, especially if there's snow or ice on the ground, or if you have a little bit of rain going on. But we want to encourage and get them going, because majority of shelters have a contract and agreement with that host church and that building that we will make sure that it is empty and available for use as of a certain time on any night or any morning following the night that we've been open. Can we go to the next slide? So we've already been over a fair amount of the safety stuff, and you've heard it from me. And again, everything needs to filter through that safety lens in order for our shelters to be able to continue operating. So when it comes to guest personal belongings, it's the pack it in, pack it out. And we're not going to give even a possibility to anyone that they could say that, oh, well, this person had my bag and now I'm missing, I don't know, family jewels that I was carrying around, whatever it may be. We don't want to give that opportunity for someone to try and take advantage of that. And we want to make sure that our guests feel safe. And so if we're saying that we're not going to let anyone else touch their property, then we don't have a reason to touch their property. When it comes to arguments, people in general can be argumentative, especially if they're feeling out of sorts, if they've had a bad day, if they have something that's traumatizing them at the moment. And so you want to try and be gentle. Most paid staff and a lot of volunteers have some experience in training in de-escalation and how to calm situations rather than engaging. And you can certainly reach out to me. You can reach out to Lindsay. If you're working with Everett, I'm not sure who's running Everett right now, but you can definitely reach out to your coordinator there if you'd like to learn more about how to de-escalate and bring things down from a place where they could lead to verbal or physical violence, because we don't want that. We want people to stay safe. We talked earlier about the buddy system between volunteers and staff members, and having some sort of signal that says, hey, I need someone to help me disengage here, can be a good thing. And that also goes along with just watching. And if you see something that looks like it's getting escalated, maybe coming over and breaking into it in a gentle way and not saying, hey, things are getting escalated, let's calm down, because that doesn't work. But rather saying, hey, I'm sorry to interrupt. So-and-so, could I get you to help me over here because it's too much for me? Something like that, to give that saving face way to break off that potentially negative and hostile type of engagement. In the case of fire or other emergency, we definitely want to get people into a safe place. Know your evacuation routes, know what doors actually go outside rather than to another interior room. Know where your AED is if you have one on site. Know where your fire extinguishers are. Know how to get your disabled or mobilely challenged guests out of the building the most easy way and the safe way. Shelters should have Narcan, and there's a great training, I think it's about 45 minutes long, that we want all of our volunteers to take. And that should be linked in your handbook. There should be an address or a URL that's provided for you so that you can take that training and have an understanding of when you may need to use Narcan and how to do it the correct way. As with life in general, one of the beautiful things about America is that we do have a 911 system, and we do have emergency responders for whatever that emergency or that threatening situation may be. And by threatening, I don't necessarily always mean people. It could be, that, hey, there was a car accident or something happened. We've had vehicles that have hit the building, that type of thing. And so don't be afraid to call 911, because our law enforcement and our fire departments and EMS want our shelters to succeed, and they make us a priority in order to help us succeed, because they would much rather have the shelters than be trying to deal with what would happen to our guests if we weren't there. Could we go to, before we move on, Lindsay or Tyler, do either of you have anything to add there as far as the safety stuff?
I think you did an excellent job. Nothing for me.
Yeah, I think you did a great job too. No, thanks, Nathan. The one thing I would add is that the sites are really set up so it can be kind of easily surveyed in that and that we're not going to kind of cram guests in just to make sure that we can cram as many people as we can. You know, they're really thoughtfully laid out so that we can really be aware and alert and aware of our surroundings and exit areas, and to make sure we have our eyes on guests at all times. So just know that we have, each site is really thoughtfully laid out like that, and staff are really trained to be aware of all of that. So feel safe in that. We really hope that you don't have to call 911. In my experience in the 4 years, it's been, I think, 2 times that we've had to do that. And first responders are amazing. They're there very quickly. So again, we don't want to have to do that, but in the event, that's what you do. Thanks, Nathan.
Absolutely. Great point. Thank you, Lindsay. If we could go to the next slide, and we are almost wrapped up, folks, just so you know, giving you a little bit of hope here. Okay. So kind of finishing out the plan presentation here is a little different focus as far as safety goes. And that's around general health. As Lindsay mentioned earlier, each shelter does have the air purifiers, the HEPA filters, and we have an abundance of them. Although most of the air purifiers that were provided by the county or through donation and other sources, they're rated so that one filter or one air purifier is actually considered to be enough to keep the room clean. In general, we're running anywhere from 6 to 10 of those just to make sure. Because unfortunately, airborne illness is a reality of our world. And so as we bring in people who have been all over the place, and we have our own staff and volunteers to watch out for, we try to go with an abundance of caution around our safety on airborne illness. We definitely have masks. That is something that came out of COVID-19, is that masks are now a common thing. And we have, I can't speak for the other shelters, but I know that I have several thousand available for Marysville. And so anytime that we have someone who comes in with that cough or sniffles or a fever, we do ask that they wear a mask while they're there. And if we have, any of our staff who feel uncomfortable at all, then they are also able to avail themselves of a mask while they're working there. Because some people, can be more vulnerable or simply worry about it. And they want to make sure that they're not going to catch something and bring it home. Wash hands, and we keep lots of hand sanitizer around as well. I know that at Marysville, we have it at the registration table. We have it at each one of the guest tables, and we have some in each one of the restrooms as well. So that in addition to washing hands, both staff and guests have that opportunity to be able to do that hand sanitizer and just keep that going throughout their time at the shelter each night that it's open. And then the surfaces clean and sanitized. In addition to those closing sanitation things that I talked about, I know that across the board at all of the shelters, one of the things that we do is clean as we go. And so we want to make sure that we're constantly throughout the evening, throughout the night, and throughout the morning, going in and checking those restrooms, checking tables where guests sit, cleaning the door handles, just carrying around, we have gloves and those disinfectant wipes. And so just constantly maintaining those surfaces. If you've ever worked in a preschool, think of the shelter in the same way. If something's been touched, it's probably got, something that's going to get onto that next person. And so we just constantly go around and clean up behind ourselves and our guests. So I just, on a personal note, I want to thank everyone who has joined us and who is watching this. And Lindsay, Tyler, Ryan, I want to thank all of you for helping facilitate and get the word out here as we try and bring more people in, because it truly does take a community. And the fact that we can all come together in order to help support those most vulnerable people in our county just fills my heart with joy. So that's it for me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nathan and Lindsay, for all of your work and expertise. Obviously, a lot of thought and care and passion goes into these programs. Cannot thank you enough. Thank you, everybody else, for joining. Ryan just put in a link to a Cognito form. If anybody is watching this on YouTube and Facebook and hasn't signed up for the training, please sign up there, and then we can connect you with the different cold weather shelters, get you that volunteer handbook, get you into the volunteer management system, and get you set up for a shift. I think one question that I saw had to do with pet crates, and yes, there are pet crates available at the cold weather shelters. If there's any other questions, please feel free to put those in the comments. And then it has contact information for myself, Lindsay, and Nathan up on the slide right now. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. Seeing some thank yous. Great. All right, thanks everyone.